everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Baron Baroza, the manager of the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled in Honolulu. And we, along with the Hawaii State Public Library System, are very happy to host this discussion of this book, Olivia, My Life of Exile in Kalaupapa, by Olivia Robello Breitha. Now, there are 38 library branches across the state that have copies of this book available. And the branch that I manage, the Library for the Blind, has a copy in recorded audio format that's available for our registered disabled patrons. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Library for the Blind provides reading materials in alternative formats like audio, braille, and large print that make it more accessible to people with visual disabilities. Okay, so let's get started by introducing our guest today. We're fortunate to have Lorenzo DeStefano here to tell us about Olivia and her life. Lorenzo was born and raised in Honolulu, a graduate of Kalani High School. He has worked extensively as a playwright, screenwriter, novelist, producer, director, film editor, and photographer. A member of the Directors Guild of America and a past member of the Motion Picture Editors Guild. He's worked in US and UK theater, has written fiction and nonfiction, original screenplays and adaptations, and produced and directed network series, documentaries, and narrative films. Shipment Day, his play based on the childhood experiences of his cousin Olivia, had its world premiere at the Manoa Valley Theater in the winter of 2018 and was named Broadway World's Best Play in Honolulu in 2019. The play will have its European stage premiere at the JA International Theater in Lisbon in 2022. As executor of Olivia's estate, Lorenzo is dedicated to keeping his cousin's legacy alive. The book we're featuring today, originally published in 1988, remains in print through Pacific Historic Parks, and there's an audiobook version available on Audible. And of course, as I mentioned, also available at the Library for the Blind for our registered disabled patrons. We're also happy to have Deanna Espinas here, who will read selected passages from Olivia's book. Deanna is a retired librarian from the state of Hawaii Department of Public Safety. She's on the board of Hawaii's Plantation Village, Play Builders of Hawaii, and the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled. She enjoys participating in cultural activities which celebrate people's experiences growing up in Hawaii. Deanna values stories of family and friends who were born in the Philippines or elsewhere, and she believes these stories of how people struggle to make new homes for themselves are important and need to be passed on to future generations. All right, so welcome to both of you. And let's get started with Lorenzo. Lorenzo, tell us a little bit about Olivia, her life, and this wonderful memoir.
Well, let's see. I only knew about Olivia in my late 30s. Her mother and my mother's mother were sisters, Portuguese girls from Kauai. And when Olivia's book came out in '88, I heard about it, I don't recall how, and my mom said, "That's our cousin." I said, "Really? How come? I never knew about her." So I don't know if it was that same family secret thing that often happens with people with leprosy, whether it's in Hawaii or elsewhere. My mom was not one to shun anyone, but I think she thought more like I wouldn't be interested. But I was, and by then I was a writer myself, so here's a relative who's a writer, published writer. It's like, wow, you know. So I said, I want to meet her. Olivia was born in 1916 in Kalaheo, Koloa, Kauai, and I got to know her over a 17-year period. I met her in '89, and she died in 2006 at the age of 90. So when I met her, she was 70, early 70s, I guess. And I hiked down to Kalaupapa without permission. I didn't even call ahead. It was the first house on the right after the bridge. That's what I was told. Greenhouse. I go there, she's not there. A guy comes by, a delivery guy, sort of suspiciously asks me what I want. I said, "I'm here to see my cousin." He goes, "She no stay. She's in Honolulu." I said, "Oh, no, I figured that out. She's not around." He says, "You know, we got phones down here. You could call next time." It was kind of funny. So anyway, I missed her. I wrote her a note. I picked a couple of mangoes. She later said, "How many mangoes did you take?" She said. I said, only two. I said, okay. You know, I eventually met her Christmas of '89, and I went there many, many times over the next 17 years. Didn't intend to write about her. I was living it, you know, that's a relative. So I was helping her with her life, and we restored a beach house. I helped her with some causes she was involved in, mostly protesting one thing or another about mistreatment. And, you know, I learned a lot about social activism from Olivia. She was an original question authority person, you know. She'd been kicked around a lot, as many patients have. And so here I was introduced to some pretty amazing relatives, you know, unlike anyone in the family, because she'd experienced something pretty amazing. You know, we don't write plays about just anybody. And so, you know, Olivia definitely stacks up as a qualified person and someone to be held up. Not that she was perfect or anything, she'd be the first to admit that, but, you know, a reluctant social activist who then later embraced that role and kicked some tail, you know, out there in terms of trying to right wrongs and speak up. She was not a quiet, shrinking violet at all, you know, and she frightened people too. So, and she used that. She tried to use it against me. I wasn't scared of her, but a couple of Portuguese, you know, we went head to head a few times. But she's a delightful person, one of the most amazingly strong people you'll ever meet, really. And so the play came out of I didn't write about it till years after she was gone, you know. The play began as a one act in 2015 at a theater in LA. 2016, it was at Play Builders, where Deanna was involved with that production. It was still a 20-minute play. And then Manoa Valley Theater commissioned a full-length script based on us winning Best Play at Play Builders. And then it was 2018. So what's that? You know, 12 years after she's gone. So it was not something I was originally thinking of, but it seemed then a natural thing, you know, to try and celebrate and sustain her what she was about, which was but fighting injustice and fighting stigma, fighting labels.
Lorenzo, how old was Olivia when she first contracted Hansen's disease?
18, 1934. Yeah, and that's in her book, and the play is based on the earlier chapters of her book, because at some point it goes to Kalaupapa, which was outside of our area, and on personal stories over the years that I collected, and then my own, you know, writing, creative writing about it into dramatic form, which is a whole other thing, you know.
Rereading the book earlier this week, I was struck by how compelling that part of her story is, about receiving that diagnosis and then being transitioned into Kalaupapa. It's gosh, it's not an experience a lot of people have, and it was pretty compelling. Did she ever tell you stories about that time of her life?
Well, you know, she got it off her chest in the book. She was reluctant to write a book. Before I met her in the 70s, people very close to her said, you got to write this down. You know, she was reluctant. She said, I'm not a writer, you know. So, but when she died, I found all her notebooks, you know, and I kept them. Those have now been donated to the museum at Kalaupapa. There's a really nice archive there, which has a lot of Olivia's everything I got, I gave to them eventually. So, yeah, she got that off her chest. She told me stories. I mean, Shipment Day is the name of the chapter in her book. Somewhat different than the play, the experience of the play. It was somewhat watered down in the book, I remember, when she told me in her living room several times about that night when the girls escaped. She and in the play, they're called Linda and Betty. They say, we're under arrest anyway, what can they do? So they to us, what more can they do to us? So off they go, and they have this experience. They see their families, they eat, they go to the Hawaii Theater, they watch a Shirley Temple movie, and these three sailors try to pick them up, and do pick them up, and take them on a joyride out to Diamond Head Lookout. And things happen at Diamond Head Lookout today as they did in the 30s, boys and girls, and it's a very traumatic scene as she described it to me. I said, that's not the way it was in the book. She goes, oh, I couldn't put that down. And, she's a Catholic girl out there with some sailors, nothing physical happened with her. She happened to get a nice sailor, which is the guy named Joe in the play. Who's a good guy, But the other two, one of them particularly, is not a good guy, and he pretty much preys on Betty. It's a very complicated scene, very emotional scene, very troubling scene, so that's what she told me, which then I used that as the basis for the play, as opposed to how it was in the book. It was, I don't think there are even sailors mentioned in the book. Mm-hmm. But she just talks about the night before. She gets a letter that says, treatment is no longer of any benefit to you. You'll be sent to Kalaupapa. So it's an embellishment, it's not a documentary. The play has proved itself nicely, in terms of audiences who are unfamiliar with leprosy in Hawaii or familiar, connected with the family story, which is what my job was, to focus on the family, mother, father, two sisters, her brother, and her, in Kalihi in the 1930s, and to make that come alive,
The other thing that struck me was how, I guess it was in the late 1960s, and this is already after they discovered that modern antibiotics can take care of Hansen's disease, how they referred to some of the people at Kalaupapa as parolees.
Mm-hmm. That's still a word that she used. Yeah, 3306 was her number. Mm-hmm. From 1934 until 2006 when they buried her. They didn't put that on the gravestone, but that was her number, and they all have numbers, as would anyone who's a ward of the state. So in a sense, you're giving up freedom by gaining, they had food allowance, discounted travel. I don't think they paid rent for their houses, cable TV, all the things that come. But that's a double-edged thing, when you take, something's been taken from you. In '69 was basically when you could mingle with people with leprosy without fear of, at least in the first world. Leprosy is still a very prevalent and misunderstood disease. People are getting leprosy every day of every year, of every month of every year. And our medical advisor on this, Dr. Kalani Brady, who you may know of, was our advisor on the play. I knew him for years as a visiting physician in Kalaupapa. He was very close to Olivia. Told me that, 400, 500,000 cases a year. Brazil has a really bad situation. It's sort of been overshadowed by COVID, but some of the themes of the play about quarantining people, about shunning the other, this thing are definitely, sort of have resonance with what's going on now. In fact, in rewriting the piece, I added masks and stuff to the staff because they would have worn them anyway, but I wanted that connection, So when the production happens in Lisbon, it's going to be even more timely than the one we did in Hawaii, which was pre-COVID, Mm-hmm. So there are resonances there in terms of, and then the L word, leper, which is, I've met people with leprosy. Richard Marks, the famous sheriff of Kalaupapa, he says, I don't care what you call me, just don't call me late for dinner. And then you have Olivia and others who said, don't you dare call me that. So it's like the N-word, it's very controversial. It's less known than the N-word, of course. But we use it in the play, not as a pejorative, but as a descriptive thing. I think that certain painful words like that have to be heard and said. The N-word has been well established, over history, and we're still working on that, people still using that word when they shouldn't, with the excuse that, well, I don't want to be politically correct. well, how about just being a human being first and forget the political thing, you know?
Absolutely.
But leprosy is, we use the word on screen, there's words flying around, there's voices that, as if on the radio, leper, leper, leper. And I know that, you know, there's some sensitivity about that, but it's one of the more powerful parts of the play. I think Deanna might agree, that you get that feeling like, oh, because after you see a play like that or a movie or whatever, you're sensitized. If you're a thinking, feeling human being, if you're not, then, you know, we can't get to you. You're off the charts. Your heart is closed. But if your heart is open, you know, once you see a person with cerebral palsy or leprosy or something, you hear that certain things are hurtful, like calling them spazzes or retards and things like that. You don't do it anymore because you learned. And it's the artist usually who are teaching you, you know, teaching so much as showing, you know, through the work. Maybe we ought to not do that. Maybe we ought to treat them like human beings, you know.
Exactly. And as an example of how feisty she was and how she really didn't like to use the word leper, in the book, you actually present a letter she wrote to Alan Alda of MASH about how they used the word in an episode, and she got pretty upset about that and wrote a letter directly to him.
That was her favorite show, and this was before I met her, and she wrote a letter. She said, "I'm really disappointed in you, Alan." You know, like, and you know, he wrote back, and it's in the book. The latest edition of the book has both letters, the letter from her and the letter from him. 2 or 3 years later, he eventually did write back, to his credit, and said, you know, I didn't get your letter, so, you know, I was busy. I really apologize. It was a nice letter. We try our best on MASH to not offend anyone, and I hope you're still a fan. Of course, that's all she needed, you know.
Absolutely.
Acknowledgement. But that started, I think that may have been a signature incident to convince her to do what her friends were telling her to do, which is write her story.
All right, I think so. And so that if that doesn't, you know, get you interested in borrowing this book or buying a copy, maybe what's coming up right now will. So let's go ahead and get to Deanna Espinas, and we're all looking forward to hearing your readings of some of the passages from the book, Deanna.
Thank you, Baron, and thank you, Lorenzo, and thank you to all who have joined me after I twisted your arms to come and listen. And I hope you're all tempted to do as Baron said, to borrow the book. Chapter 1, Growing Up. Until the year 1934, my life was ordinary and uneventful. I was born on the island of Kauai, territory of Hawaii, on June 6, 1916. My family consisted of 3 sisters, 1 brother, and my parents. My parents did their best in bringing us up. Our religion was Catholic. We went to church and learned to be respectful of each other and of other people's feelings too. We lived on a lot on Kauai, which my father homesteaded until it finally became his. On land, he grew sweet potatoes, sugar cane, corn, and other vegetables, all for our table. Wild pheasant was abundant. He shot them right from our kitchen window. We ate them very often. My maternal grandparents lived below us, and we would visit them often. It was so wonderful when we were little. Once a year, my grandparents would slaughter a few pigs, and the grown-ups would all be there. They made Portuguese pork and blood sausage. To keep the sausage in perfect condition, they rendered the fat from the pigs and put the fat in a barrel. The sausages were then laid very neatly in the barrel, which kept them in perfect condition for months. Grandma's house had such a big pantry and such wonderful smells. The scent of her fresh homemade cheese and butter was just indescribable. Then there were the Christmas and Easter holidays. I remember the first time I saw Santa come into Grandma's or Grandpa's house. How scared I was. I cried in total fear of his white beard and ran out of sight into my grandma's pantry. I heard Mama calling my name and reassuring me that I did not answer her. She found me and told me that Santa was my very good friend. I went to meet him, and I liked it when he took me on his lap and gave me an apple and some candy. My grandparents' place had beautiful trees. There was a peach tree and also a tree with round little fruit, which smelled wonderful and tasted great. Through all these beautiful trees flowed the most pleasant brook. It made such lovely sounds as it splashed over the rocks. There were frogs in this brook, which we caught and fried. They tasted great to me, but would you believe my grandma would not use the pan that the legs were cooked in for any other cooking. Those beautiful memories are with me still. When I remember my childhood, I wonder how I survived. One day when I was about 5, Mama was doing the wash. She always boiled the white clothes and needed some kindling for the fire. My big sister was told to go cut some branches that had fallen from the trees that surrounded our place. Using a sugarcane knife, machete, my sister cut a bundle of kindling and then returned to the house, leaving the knife behind, partially hidden in the wooded growth. While playing with my brother, I got hit on the wrist with the knife. It didn't hurt immediately, but as I looked at it for an instant, I saw the inside of my wrist. The end where my fingers were almost chopped off. It began to hurt so much that I screamed in pain and in shock. Instinctively, I tried to hold my little hand and started running and crying toward the field of sugarcane. I passed out, possibly due to so much blood loss. When I came to, I was in my bed in my nightgown. That meant that I was sick and would get royal service. My hand was bandaged very neat and snug, but not tight. Oh, whoa, I couldn't feel my fingers at all. The hand was numb. I couldn't see blood. You won't believe this, but Mama took care of the whole injury. She put my hand in a sling and I was told not to move it at all. The next day when she washed the wound with a few drops of Lysol and water, the parts of my hand were together. Mama was good, no doubt about it. She saved my right hand, even though she must have felt like passing out too. For a slight woman, she was only 4 feet 11 inches. My mother was very tough and very wonderful. When I was about 7 years old, we left Kauai and came to Honolulu. On Sundays, Sister and I would ask Mama to let us go for walks. We used to walk a lot and would walk long distances. We would walk to Mauna Loa Gardens in Honolulu. We used to take sandwiches and cold drinks and have picnics. We used to talk about the future, about being married and maybe having children, things of that sort. Dreams, so many dreams. We both had them, and they sounded possible, all within reach. Ah, the young dream so many wonderful dreams. Oh well, perhaps the dream when one is young is good, for when we grow up, those dreams become memories. Besides, dreams are perfect, and life is not. Chapter 2, the diagnosis. About the first week in October of 1934, I began to have pain in my stomach. It hurt for a few days and then stopped. Then it began to hurt a lot again. Mom decided to take me to our doctor, who promptly put me in the hospital to check for appendicitis. I had needles in my arm and blood samples taken for the next few days. One morning, a white-haired person came by my bed and asked me why my cheeks were so rosy and if I was wearing makeup. I said no. He then asked me if he could come back later, take a sample of my skin. I did not know at that time that it would be a snip. I did that this might have something to do with what I was there for. What the hell did I know about anything? I had never been in a hospital before. I told the doctor, okay. His name was Dr. Wason, and he was what they call a skin specialist. At the same time, my stomach started to hurt, and small water blisters broke out on my legs. Dr. Wason came back in a couple of hours with his little tray. On the tray, there were a couple of razor blades and some cotton swabs. He took a couple of snips off my wrist and elbow and said thank you and went away. On the third day of my stay in the hospital, my mother had to be hospitalized for major surgery, which I didn't know about until later. That evening, my doctor came to tell me, Olivia, you will go to surgery tomorrow to have your tonsils removed. I don't know what my tonsils had to do with my stomach ache. Does anyone? The next morning, I was taken to surgery. When I woke up after the surgery, lo and behold, I found that I had been taken to the isolation ward. I did not know why I had been put in isolation. On the 5th day of my hospital stay, I was sent home. This is really difficult to put together. So many things happened, one after the other. I was doing some housework at home, singing The Little Grass Shack together with the phonograph. And there was a knock at the door, which I answered. A man stood outside the door with a briefcase. He asked if Olivia Robello lived there. I admitted that I was she and invited him in. He did, and we sat down. He opened his case and shuffled some papers. I sat there waiting, no thought in my mind as to the terrible sentence that was in store for me. And suddenly, out of the clear blue, happy sky of a few moments before, this man says to me, you must go to the hospital. What hospital? I said. I just came home from the hospital. Not sick. He replied, oh, not that kind of hospital. You are going to Kalihi Hospital. I asked, why should I go there? He said, because you have leprosy. Suddenly, the whole world changed. I was changed instantly from Olivia Robello, who was happily waiting to be married, to Olivia, the frozen nothing. I felt alone and so numb for moments that seemed like a million years. I couldn't speak or think. The only thought I had was to leave the room and go to the bathroom where I knew there was some poison. I decided that I wanted to kill myself. I went into the bathroom, shut the door, and searched blindly for the poison for a few minutes. I don't know why I could not find it. It wasn't meant to be. There is no way in this world to tell anyone how I felt. The utter hopelessness. The room was not where I should be. I was a stranger. I felt dirty, sinful, untouchable, ugly. No tears, just disbelief. My tears were burning in my heart, but I could not cry. On Friday afternoon, my sister drove me to the very end of Pu'uhale Road, where Kalihi Hospital was located. My sister still tried to be hopeful. She said, maybe when they examine you, they will find that you don't have to stay here at all. Dear girl, she was just trying to make me feel better. We walked into the doctor's office. He asked, which of us was Olivia? I said, I. He said, the nurse will be here soon. She will take you examination room and I will be there to see you. The nurse came and took me into a little cubicle and told me to strip to my bra and panties. Please, I said, let this be done later on. As of yesterday, I have my period. I feel so embarrassed. She said, no, you must strip now. After stripping, she showed me into the examination room, and I saw 3 doctors instead of just one. The exam took about 20 minutes. I then stumbled out of the room and back into the cubicle to put my clothes on. I was allowed to go into the office to say goodbye to my sister. She held me and tried to encourage me. The doctor said he would be talking to her soon, so she left. I have never felt so lonely. I was taken to the infirmary, given pajamas, and assigned to a bed. I was so very scared when I saw the patients. I really can't blame people who are scared of leprosy. Really. Why? I was a patient and still, I was very scared. Chapter 3, Kalihi Hospital. On Monday, I was told to put on my robe because I was going to have my picture taken that morning. My picture was to be taken behind the dentist's office. The lawn there was green, and there was also a hedge on the inside of the fence. There were trees through which the bright sun could be seen and felt. There was the photographer with his camera on a tripod, and everything was ready. There was even the number, which the nurse wanted to hold against my chest. I wouldn't do it. That was and is, I'm sure, my number, even now, 3306. The nurse told me to pin up my hair. I did. And she then told me to cross my hands on my chest. The photographer was all set. He said, will you give me a smile? I thought to myself, I'm dying inside and you ask me to smile? I gave him the dirtiest look I could muster. I thought, you stupid man. What do I have to look forward to except misery? And you expect me to smile. After you take my picture, you can get out of this place. The doctors can go home. I can't go home. And you expect me to smile. He took my picture, front shot and profile. I am reminded of a dream I had about a year before I entered Kalihi Hospital. It was a very strange and scary dream. I dreamt that I was in a strange place. There were people in this place who had distorted faces with bumps and swelling and swollen ears. When I awakened the next morning, I felt very depressed. Mama noticed this and wanted to know the reason. I told her my dream, which also included a fence around this strange place. Mama was sitting on a bench across from me. There were two double wooden fences between us, and between these two low fences, there were greenery. Honestly, it was a very real and depressing dream. My mother said, "Don't think about it anymore. Why should you be going anywhere?" After a few days, I forgot the dream. It wasn't until I entered Kali Hospital I remembered it. When my mother came to visit me, dear God, it was exactly as in my dream. Fences, distorted faces, and all, exactly. I pointed out to her and she agreed. Chapter 5, Shipment Day. The time finally came when there was no turning back. In June of 1937, I received my bad news. I mean bad. I got a letter telling me, quote, "Treatment is no longer of any benefit to you. This is to notify you on June 30, 1937, you are being sent to Kalaupapa," end quote. I never received any treatment other than contrast baths. It really was bad news. First, the letter said that treatment would benefit me no longer. That killed any hope I had of ever getting well. Second, Kalaupapa seemed to me be the end of the world, the very end. In public, I tried to be cheerful, mostly in front of my family. In the privacy of my room, my pillow was soaked with tears. Also, I was so full of fear. The thought of coming to Kalaupapa and the thought of no treatment was agony. However, it is so true that anticipating some terrible event is sometimes worse than when it happens. I suppose it was the knowledge that I wouldn't be able to see my family every other day that made it so difficult. My mother was heartbroken. Poor darling Mama. She tried so hard not to cry, but I could see her eyes. They were full of suffering and helplessness. As the time for leaving Honolulu drew closer, I had my packing to do. And oh God, doing the packing was so final. Pretty soon, it became June 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I thought to myself, oh dear Lord, only 5 more days to what? I wonder what life will be like in Kalaupapa. I was so scared, and yet I prayed that it might be easier to get, quote, paroled, end quote, from Kalaupapa than it was from Kali. Paroled was the word used for being found negative. I asked my mom to go home before 11 o'clock in the morning that I was to sail. She wanted to stay until we were ready to leave. Oh, how I hated to get into the car and leave for the wharf. Oh, unhappy moment. Everyone was sobbing. So many tears. As we were on our way to the wharf, I was so sad. I knew that my mother was walking home. I was so sure that she was still crying and would cry whenever she remembered that I was now far, far away. Oh, how lonely she must have been. I remember when I was 16 and we were living at the top of Puale Road near Kalihi Hospital. While we were living there, I recall that once in a while I would hear wailing as though some women were in sorrow. The sound of it was so bad. And then after a few hours, I would be sitting on our porch and would see a truck pass our house. The top and sides of the truck were covered with a tarp, but the back was open. I could see people in the truck. They were crying. Now, as the car I rode in passed along the same route, I knew why those people had been crying. They were being shipped to Kalaupapa, and I knew that I was going to the same place. Soon, we were at the wharf where the ship, the SS Hawaii, waited. We were put on the stern of this ship, which was used to transport cattle. We could still smell the cattle. Not that there were cattle, but they had been earlier on. It wasn't dirty, but the smell was still there. It was easy to get on the ship, for the land was even with the pier. There was covering all around the section of the ship that we were in. We could not see outside, and no one could see inside where we were. And suddenly, I heard someone calling softly my name from outside. I answered, and the covering was lifted. I saw two faces. One was my brother, and the other was my Uncle John. They had come to wish me well. My uncle told me, "Don't worry, you will come back." He said it with so much conviction. I think I believed him. I wanted to believe him. As the ship sailed for Kalaupapa, I threw my leis overboard, hoping that they would float back to shore as a sign that I would return. When the ship was underway, they took the covering off from the sides of the ship, and we were able to look out at the ocean and sky. It was a beautiful sunny day. I know it was because I had the worst sunburn of my life. I was as red as a cooked lobster. I don't remember what time we left Honolulu. I did not sit down the whole way over, but kept watching the island of Oahu getting farther and farther away, and finally disappearing altogether. Some of the people were seasick. In a few hours, we were able to see the tip of Molokai. We thought that we had reached our destination, but no. The ship kept on going. We slowly passed the low hills of Molokai and then hermetic cliffs. They looked so high. We arrived in Kalaupapa. Thank you.
Wow, Deanna, thank you. That was an amazing reading.
Thank you.
So we actually do have a
Thank you. Thank you, Lorenzo.
we have a couple of questions from.
I heard the roosters in the background. I thought I was in
I know. I let them be part of the act. Yes.
Speaking of that, Lorenzo, we actually have a couple of questions. So the first question we have is from Vera Tom. And she wonders, Lorenzo, if you ever did have a chance to visit with Olivia at Kalaupapa.
Oh, yes. I think in those 17 years, I must have gone twice a year, most years, sometimes three. So what's that? 24, 30 times. And she also came to see me in LA when I lived there. She came to see me in British Columbia when I lived on an island up there. For her 85th birthday, I sent her on a cruise to Alaska with her nurse, Julie Sigler. So yeah, we saw a lot of each other. We went to New York to the UN with Bernard Punikaya and several other patients at Kalaupapa who received a medal, which I have right here in my office, from Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the UN. This was in '97, for their bravery, you know. So yeah, I saw her a lot.
Okay, so we have another question from an attendee, and this is more for Deanna. The question includes a comment: such beautiful writing by Olivia and excellent reading by Deanna Espinas. And the question for Deanna is, you captured Olivia's character so well. Can you explain how you prepare to read someone else's words? And is there a method you can share with others who'd like to do what you do?
Oh, this is all Lorenzo's fault. I really didn't want to be a part of this because it's a very moving story. And in order to read it out loud, I think Olivia was sitting right there next to me when we did the first presentation at Kumukahua. But just reading it and imagining how she felt, the emotions. There were some nice, beautiful descriptive parts and some really fun moments that she was irascible. But then the other moments that were so poignant, I tried to reread it again and see, am I doing her justice in reading? Because this book is so important. I think it was just the fact that the whole story and Olivia's personality took over.
Deanna, have you ever had training as an actor or experience as an actor?
No. I'm a, what is the term? I'm a groupie, entertainment groupie. I go to every performance, and then when I find out that I can help with rehearsals, I want to be in the background. So I'm a member of Play Builders of Hawaii, and that's how I met Lorenzo when he invited me to do that book reading. I'm still active with them. I still prefer doing the background. As you can see, I'm a bundle of nerves right now.
No, we can't see that at all.
No, I love how creative arts allows you to share emotions, share stories. And instead of lecturing people, hopefully it'll touch someone's heart to understand and feel how others are feeling. Yeah.
Can I insert something here about choosing Deanna for this? Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Basically, because of Play Builders, Deanna got involved in the play reading at Kumu, and lovely voice, as you could hear, very clean and enunciated. I like to think Olivia would be approving of that, because Olivia, although she only went to 6th grade, she was self-educated, you know, and she could fling pigeon around and do all that, but she also prided herself on her ability to speak, you know, the language of the Western world. And so when I heard Deanna's voice, and we got around to producing this audiobook in 2016, I'm glad she agreed. And she taped it over a 2-day period in Honolulu with Ben Hamilton and Locke Lynch, a couple of sound guys, at a studio in Chinatown, right? And it's a popular book on Audible, and I hope people check it out and listen to the whole thing. It's a nice alternative to reading. And Deanna, once again, you make it come alive because you do care about Olivia, and it comes through. So thank you. And I hope you can do more of these things for public readings and so on as things open up now, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, Deanna's terrific. Another question for you, Lorenzo, from Liz Drogi. Liz asks, was Olivia ever cured of Hansen's disease? And I know we touched on that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I don't think there's a cure for that, you know. It's treatable, And so she received medication from the very beginning, some very strange things that are now not used. But until Dr. Hansen's disease from Norway came up with these sulfone drugs in the 50s, which eradicated if properly administered, the contagious aspect of it. They were grabbing at straws. Chalmugra oil from a tree, bee sting, venom, kinds of crazy stuff. And these people were essentially guinea pigs. And in the play, the father rages. He says, "My daughter's not a guinea pig," And but she was treated for the effects of leprosy, which were circulatory problems, persistent wounds, not healing, things like that for life. And her case was serious. There's a lot of misnomers about leprosy, that noses fall off and stuff like that. That is largely just the crock, but there are effects, and some people, I've seen them, and it's, I don't like to say shocking, because it's just, there it is, and everyone's different, just like COVID affects people differently. But yeah, she had issues with extremities, as many people did. Eventually had to have a wheelchair, couldn't drive. The slow kind of diminution of self. And yet she and others, and Olivia's not the only one, she just happened to get that book out there, which was important. But some strong people I met in Kalaupapa over the years. Almost of them gone now. But these people are tough, and they've been primed through the fire, to be that way. So yeah, so no cure. It's still around, as I mentioned earlier. So it's one of those biblical things. It's probably always going to be around,
Absolutely. Hey, Lorenzo, I have a question personally. Since you are a writer, do you know anything about Olivia's writing process? How she decided on, specific chapters, and how long it eventually took her to complete, the book?
Yeah, that was before I met her. As I said, I met her in '89. It came out in '88. But from what I know, the process was she was urged to keep notebooks, and she had some help. Now I think you would use some technology and just talk it out, and have it transcribed later. Sit around and turn on your phone or a recorder and talk it out. But she worked with several people. Pat Boland was a name that comes up. Anway Law, different people who were friends over the years who helped her in that process. I wasn't around for that, but I'm sure it was a difficult process. It was published by Arizona Memorial Press, which later became Pacific Historic Parks, which is the publisher that has it now. But it's been 33 years that it's been out. Tens of thousands of people. They just printed 5,000 more copies. So, and we're working on an ebook. So, my job as executor relative is to see that it stays out there in different forms. Hence the audiobook, hence the play.
So we only have one more comment from one of our attendees. Kelly Castillo on Molokai is one of the nurses at the Kalaupapa care home there. And it's not so much a question, but she wants everyone to know that if any of our attendees have any questions about the Kalaupapa care home, she can provide some answers. And maybe that's something we can take and kind of handle offline here. But yeah, so the Kalaupapa care home on Molokai is there. Mm-hmm.
There's so few people there now. I was last there in October of '18 when I went over with Ku'ule Shafi, who performed the part of Olivia in the play at Manoa Valley Theater, and I wanted her to see the place. And the National Park Service got us in there for about 4 days, and we saw some of the patients who I had met before, but they were much older now, and I think there's only about 5 or 6 left. So, hats off to all the staff at Kalaupapa over the years, the state and the federal, Kokuas who came in and still come in. you know, these people gave a lot and they got a lot from that process just by meeting these amazing people, really, you know.
Okay, so the final thing to do before we leave is I did want to remind everyone that the book, Olivia, My Life of Exile in Kalaupapa, is still in print through Pacific Historic Parks, as Lorenzo mentioned, and also available at 38 library branches across the state of Hawaii. And as I mentioned earlier, the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled also has a version in recorded audio format specifically for our registered disabled patrons. So I'd like to thank both Lorenzo and Deanna for joining us today and presenting this discussion of Olivia's book. It's been very eye-opening and very entertaining as well. And we hope you all enjoyed it as well. Any last words from either Lorenzo or Deanna?
Just thank
Deanna,
you
you
for,
go first.
huh?
You go first.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lorenzo and Darren, especially for allowing us to do outreach. And I see that I have my sisters from the United Methodist Women and members of the Faith Action for Community Equity and the other project that I'm involved in with the Hui to reach out to elders. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Okay, take it away, Lorenzo.
Well, I would just say that it's been a pleasure. I met Baron in April, and of course, I've known Deanna for several years now. If anyone's interested in the play, the website is shipmentdayplay.com. There's a lot of information there. I'm very excited about the premiere in Portugal next year, which will be in English and Portuguese. It's kind of an experimental production, bilingual, and taking it to another level. It's not the same script as we did in Manoa. No reason to repeat things, just try new things. And all the goal being to keep Olivia's survival story alive. I think there's a lot to learn from it. We need strong people who are selfless in that way. There's too much self-promotion going on now. People who really don't deserve attention are getting attention. And the people who don't get attention deserve it. So that's part of my job, is to shine the light on people who I feel deserve attention. And Olivia's certainly one of them.
All right. Well, thank you again to Lorenzo and Deanna, and thank you to all of you who joined us today. We appreciate it, and we hope you stay tuned for more online virtual programs from the libraries and the Hawaii State Public Library system. Have a good day.
Thank you.